you're watching FRCD on CAN TV. Family Resource Center on Disabilities is the Region 1 Parent Training and Information Center of Illinois. You can reach us at 312-939-3513 or email us at info@frcd.org. We encourage you to visit our website at www.frcd.org and follow us on Twitter at FRCDPTI. You can subscribe to our YouTube page at FRCD1231, and we also encourage you to like us on Facebook. Family Resource Center on Disabilities is not a law firm or a legal service agency. Family Resource Center on Disabilities will not provide any type of services that may be construed as practicing law, including but not limited to giving legal advice, drafting legal documents, or representing families in any type of legal proceeding. Hi, my name is Paula Wills, and you're watching FRCD on CAN TV, where we discuss special education, parent advocacy, and resources for families of children with disabilities. And today I am happy to have back our guest, Zubida Pasha.
Thank you for having me, Paula.
Absolutely. She is our bilingual trainer at Family Resource Center on Disabilities. And today we are talking about discipline and IDEA. Now, we're not going to go through the entire presentation because that would take 3 to 4 hours.
That's correct.
So we're going to pick a couple of points and focus on those today.
Thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity to explain discipline and IDEA for those who have IEPs. Most of the time, there is a misunderstanding. And my child have an IEP, he does not have to have any discipline actions or consequence. Rather, the law have this thing that all students should have a discipline based on the action of the infraction and also the impact of the disability, and if there is any connection between the action and the disability, which is called the manifestation determination. So if the action is directly and substantially, we have to focus on the language here, because when IDEA was born in 1975, it was just determination, meaning linked directly. Now it's substantially, meaning that the disability must have that heavy impact and adverse impact directly to the infraction.
So can you give us an example of substantial versus directly?
Okay. Substantial, when you have a child who have run out of the room, hit a personnel. The child may have some emotional disabilities or attention, for example, ADHD. I'm not trying to kind of categorize or stigmatize each disability, but it depends on how it manifests itself.
But, in all honesty, it is common at times. We do get a lot of calls.
Right. A little kid is storming out of the door, and they bump into the adult, they fail.
Right.
So now they know that child have an IEP, and they will say, oh, no, we are going to suspend you before they take any decision or make any decision on suspensions. There is something that is called the 10 suspension or the 10th day of suspension. There are the in-house suspension we need to know about. And the in-house suspension is when the student is sent to the office, the clerk office or principal office or somebody's office outside of the school, the classroom environment where he receive work.
Okay.
Right? Those count. Parents will pick up their children when they get the call. They want to make sure, is it suspension? Is it on the record of the record? The reason be, by the 10th call, there's something that should be called manifestation or determination review to see if those actions of the behaviors are substantially linked to the disability. Now, substantially, I'm sorry, I want to kind of clarify based on your first question. Substantially is when that is the disability manifestation. Directly, it may be just the action. Sometimes, back in the day, we call children our children. They will run, they will do all of those stuff. So many times we had heard these things. They would act children. Now, we don't hear this, but we have to say substantially direct substantially direct, to the manifestation of the child disability, whether it is attention, did not see the staff, or the emotion risen too high where he just disregarding everybody in front of him. And now with that, the school have they have to do their work, meaning they have to look into the IEP, what is missing. Are we giving the child or providing the child with all the support necessary for him to be successful in the school environment? Successful definition means that he have all what he need to maintain regulated behavior, including not limited to sensory breaks, very organized and structured, because if he is storming and you're giving him break and say, oh, Johnny, you can go and get your break, then he's going to have the same incident. So they have to make sure that the accommodation and supports are appropriate to meet the needs.
Okay.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, absolutely. No, because with discipline and IDEA and behavior, it gets so involved that sometimes, you forget your original question because there's several things that happen in between.
It's layered. It's very much layered.
Thank you. Very, very
It's
much
very layered.
So one thing I would like to also ask is, we talk about discipline and IDEA. So how is managing discipline different for a child with an IEP versus a child without an IEP?
Discipline apply itself to all students. And the reason B is for the school and the climate safety. So the school job is to keep everybody safe.
Okay.
Student, body, and personnel, administrator, etc. So for those who have an IEP, the matter is a little bit different. Like I said, we have to see if those infractions that the student had or the behavioral challenges are linked to the disability. Versus without an IEP, without a disability label, they will receive the consequence. Now, for the student with an IEP, if it is found that the school did not provide the appropriate support, they did not have a behavior intervention plan, for example.
Okay.
They did not analyze the function of the behavior. The aid didn't show up, for example. The medication was not administered as it's supposed to be, like the IEP has dictated. Several things that may not be applied based on the IEP, then they cannot suspend.
Okay.
And take action of suspension or expulsion for, except the three things that I will highlight later for the expulsion. For those who does not have IEPs, unfortunately, they will face those disciplinary action and consequence unless if it is suspected that they have a disability and the team have talked about it, the parent had mentioned it, then there is another conversation that we can talk about it as we kind of give and take in the conversation.
Yeah, again, it is a very layered process.
Yes.
It's probably a year's worth of shows. So is there a difference with the 504 plan?
Not necessary. There is no manifestation determination for 504 per se. But there are some things that need to be looked at before they make a determination if there is a suspension or not. It's the 504, because you have the 504 is only for accommodating the student to access the school, the educational environment, accommodating to access, versus IEP providing the accommodation, modification, supports, and services, etc., to access and be successful. So 504 will not give you that MDR, manifestation determination review. It's only falling under IDEA, which is the federal law that governs special education services. Thus, 504 should be implemented to the T, right? It is not a legally binding document, but it falls under the Rehab Act for anti-discrimination about a child or a student disability. So they still have to have a link of free appropriate public education, but it is kind of in parentheses not as heavy and weighted as IDEA FAPE.
Right.
It's slightly different. But still, I encourage the parent whose children or child have a 504 and facing disciplinary action, they should look into more functional behavior assessment and behavior intervention plans. Document. because that may be a lead to an IEP.
Right, no, absolutely. And I was going to, actually, you may have already answered my next question is, so when you come across a student who doesn't know they have a disability, so like especially if students whose disability is not visual, you can't necessarily see it right away. So in that sense, like you were saying before, they would
Then what happened?
recommend an IEP, an evaluation.
Well, a couple of things that we need to look into it before we kind of determine whether there will be disciplinary action or not.
Okay.
First of all, if a trigger of a refer, whether coming from the school or coming from the parent, had been discussed, then there are some safeguards and protection to that child.
Okay.
Okay, because we're talking about initiation of evaluation possibly and accessing services. If the parent said, no, I'm not going to accept or I'm not in agreement with the evaluation, then the child is at loss.
Okay.
If the child, if the parent revoked their parental right to receive, special education for their children, the child is out of luck. If I can say this, it's not appropriate, as a jargon, but they will receive those disciplinary action. If the child has not been any conversation about their behavior or those things, and out of blue this thing had happened, they will still face disciplinary action. But as long as there is something in documentation saying, I am concerned about my child, there is a pattern of behavior, there are suspension, I'm picking him up, the teacher send notes, that type of things will safeguard the child. And possibly the consequences may not be as harsh as, because there is a discipline, there is the student book of conduct that apply to all students.
Okay.
But for those with the IEP, there is that little piece. Is it directly and substantially coming from the manifestation of their disability?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, explained that, because we do get quite a few calls at the center, with questions in regards to they're calling me to pick my child up every day. This incident happened, and the teacher or the principal or whoever told me that it's my child's fault, or he's supposed to have he needs someone to help him focus. But as we say at FRCD, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen.
Yes.
So even if you are in the process, you suspect your child may need special education services, and these things are happening, you want to document it, even if you don't have the IEP yet. So if they're calling you every day, you want to make sure that's documented. So don't just pick them up and leave. Make sure you get something from the office or whoever you're picking it up from in writing saying that the school is requesting that you pick up your child, unless I'm wrong.
You are absolutely right. That many calls and that many concerns about the child pickup. First of all, if I'm picking up my child, I'd rather have something in writing.
Okay.
Otherwise, it may be perceived as an early pickup. And we have cases where it was perceived as an early pickup that became attendance, that became truancy conversation. Mm-hmm. Now, that we need to avoid at any cost by telling them, you're calling me to pick up my child. What is the report, the incident report? What happened? Facts, kind of simple. If there are many pickups and calls, those are red flags.
Right.
After the second, third call to pick up the child, I will say, okay, what is going on here? Give me the data. Show me what is going on in detail. What are the triggers? How this incident had
Right,
happened.
and how are they documenting that call? Are they documenting it as a suspension? Are they documenting it at all?
Right, because sometimes we had these incidents, as you may be aware, where it was off the record. And I have heard it from administrators. It's off the record, like I'm doing you a favor, which it should not be the case.
Especially if you're getting a call every day.
Think about the three things that will not forgive or will not allow the student to stay in that school, which is if they have bodily injury, if the student ran into a staff, the staff fell, broke their legs, whatever. Bodily injury meaning can be something that happened to their bodies, or even the physical or emotional distress that they can experience. It may not even breaking their leg or hand, whatever, just that emotional distress because, they took me by surprise. Then there is the illegal drug, and there is the weapon. Weapon can be as simple as a box cutter, a sharp pencil. They are considered as weapon. Now, these three things, the law is not going to protect the child, regardless if they have an IEP, regardless if the action is linked substantially to their disability. That is called, expulsion.
Right.
They will face that's a removal. And
expulsion or sent to
an alternative
okay.
Educational placement, which is the IEAS. I believe that's how the interim alternative placement in a different school. Most likely it will be in a therapeutic or alternative schools. Now that can be a disturbance to the child educational needs. That can be a put down. You have to think about so many things when those things happen.
And also, again, depending on what the students need, because we actually got a call about this not too long ago. Depending on what the students' needs are, the way students might be disciplined or managed in an alternative setting may exacerbate the student's the symptoms of the student's disability.
That's right.
So, like, if they're very strict, like, everyone has to stand, and I'm not saying that that's the case, I'm just saying hypothetically. Everyone has to stand in line, very straight, back against the wall. For some students, they may not be able to do that, or they may not be able to hold that pose for long. So that may exacerbate their disability and, cause of behavior.
There are, like we said earlier, there are many layers and many scenarios. Right. But again, the law does not protect those who has an IEP. We have conversations with parents.
Absolutely.
My child have an IEP, that they should not call me. They should deal with them. First thing, you have to look at the IEP. Is it meeting the child's need? Because sometimes the services and supports that are outlined in the IEP are not appropriate. When I say appropriate, meaning that it will meet their needs. They may not have a behavior intervention plan. They may not have the proper accommodation. They may not have the proper personnel who is trained sometimes to handle certain behaviors. There are cases when my daughter was in early elementary, they need positive reinforcement. Yes. And you have somebody who is, kind of come in and just kind of looking at the kid, and the kid is small, and of course they'd be scared of somebody in uniform, like the SRO, which is the school resource officer, and they looking at the handcuffed, and they looking at all of that. That kind of triggers sometimes some emotional distress.
Yeah, and depending on what may have happened in their home.
Can be in shutting down. It can be screaming and hollering and running. It can be, manifesting itself in so many ways, forms, and shapes. So to avoid all of that, parents really need to be informed how to read that IEP and apply every bit of information to their children's need, and do like a max, like a match with their children's needs to avoid all of this, honestly.
And you brought up a good point about police and resource officers in the school. Can the school call the police on a student? Yes. And is it for, does it just have to be those three things? Or, we've heard cases where, my student wouldn't sit down, so we called the police.
Well, the school can call the police. Sometimes there is two sides, to each scenario we get. So the police was called, possibly the student was threatening the teacher.
Right.
Did not cause the three things like the bodily injury, or have a legal drug, or have a weapon. They may not have the three things, but just that threat. I have seen kids with my child when she was in high school. They are, big size kids who have autism, and they don't have verbal skills to express themselves. So their body, physical body, and their humming or their grunting scares sometimes the teacher. And I'm looking, those cases like she's going to call the police, and I was like, they don't mean no harm.
Right.
So there are many cases, but back to your question, yes, the school can call the police. Not necessarily for the three things, but basically for the three things. And if they feel mainly the definition of discipline and calling the police is to keep everybody safe. It's
Right.
the climate safety in a school environment. That's
Right.
all what it matters. It depends on how school district, they write their policies and do their, student book of conduct. Because each school, they have their own student the book of conduct. It's not one size fits all.
So, a couple of things as we come down to our, boy, time flies.
Yes, it
to
does.
our last 5 minutes. I want to talk about 10 things parents should know about school removal. What should parents know about a 10-day, it should be day removal? So we have here if it's getting close to 10 days, is a red flag that something is wrong.
That's correct.
Right. So that's one of the reasons why it's like super important to document.
And monitor
Right.
those suspension, whether they are in-house. When I say in-house, they can stay in school, but they are not with their peers in the classroom.
Right.
There is also something that is called free appropriate public education provision. Are the student doing the same work when they are outside of that classroom
Right,
environment?
absolutely.
We have to make sure that they are receiving what they need in terms of education. Are they bringing their homework when they are suspended? Are they going to have the same leverage in testing, etc.? It's a lot of layers again, but close to the 10 days is something is wrong. We need to look into the IEP, adjust the services and support. Maybe the placement may not be the appropriate placement for the child.
No, absolutely.
We have seen these cases where the school is not a good fit for the child.
And then we have get a copy of the code of student conduct for every school. So especially if you have a child with who demonstrates behaviors in the school, you definitely want to be aware of what is expected in regards to conduct.
Make sure you read it. Please don't shove it in a drawer and just don't read it, because it may come in handy to where you see certain highlights, because certain school districts that have a heavy population who have IEPs, they tweak their student book of conduct. Also match the accommodation with the book of conduct. What does it say? I have seen the other extreme with the school. They don't have a large student body with special education, and they are a little bit stiffer and they are a little bit harder. Make sure the documentation is a key,
Right.
which you are going to say it.
Yeah, it's right there. Get documentation.
Document.
Yeah, no, and that we can't say enough.
Yes.
And of course, be cautious with in-school suspensions. So those are a couple of things that, that as parents you should be mindful of. I will say that the training, there is much, much more. We go way in depth in IDEA and discipline. A couple of things that we want you to take home with you in terms of what happens at the 10th day of removal. As we point out, that the school must provide services to ensure the child meets FAPE, or their free appropriate public education, after 10 days. So as you pointed out in the previous slide, that you want to make sure that the student is doing the same work, receiving services as appropriate during this time. The other couple of things is you want to check to see if the behavior intervention plan is in place, if you have one. Adjust the behavior intervention plan if in place. If not in place, complete a functional behavior assessment and create a behavior intervention plan, and consider change of placement, which is actually something we will be talking about at Family Resource Center this Saturday, December 7th. So we are down to our last 8 seconds. So I want to thank Zabita for this wonderful information, and I want to thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful week.
Have a wonderful week.